When 17-year-old Alex Martinez and 16-year-old Jordan Rivera vanished from their quiet New Mexico neighborhood, no one imagined their disappearances were just the beginning of a calculated spree of terror that would grip Albuquerque and push the city's SWAT teams to the edge. In the quiet outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico, life seemed ordinary. Families went about their daily routines, children rode their bikes down familiar streets, and the desert sun cast long, golden shadows across the sand and mountains. On the surface, it was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen, where people could leave their doors unlocked and know their neighbors would watch over their homes. But beneath that calm and predictable rhythm, something dark was beginning to stir, something that would soon shatter the town's sense of safety. It began in the most innocuous ways. Small crimes that most townsfolk might shrug off: vandalized street signs, graffiti on walls, the occasional stolen bicycle started appearing with unusual frequency. At first, the police saw it as ordinary teenage mischief. After all, adolescence often came with a streak of rebellion. But the patterns didn't make sense. The acts weren't random. They seemed deliberate, almost organized, as if someone was testing the boundaries of the law and the limits of fear. Then came the disappearances. A young boy vanished on his way home from school. At first, neighbors assumed he had gone to a friend's house or gotten a ride home, but hours stretched in 2 days and there was no sign of him. Local authorities launched a search, scouring empty lots, abandoned buildings, and desert trails, but the boy seemed to have vanished into thin air. The town's initial disbelief gave way to unease. It didn't stop there. Another teenager disappeared, this time in a different part of the city. The disappearances were far enough apart that some still hoped they were unrelated, but a creeping sense of dread began to take hold. Parents started keeping their children inside after school. Streets that had once buzzed with activity grew eerily quiet in the evenings, and rumors began to swirl. People whispered about a group of teenagers who seemed fearless, even reckless, moving through the city-like shadows, leaving a trail of unease wherever they went. The police, initially confident that they were dealing with ordinary mischief, soon realized they were facing something far more serious. As they dug into the backgrounds of missing children and local disturbances, they began to see a pattern. The missing teenagers were all last seen near abandoned buildings, lots that had been deserted for years, places most locals avoided. Even more disturbing, each location had signs of being carefully prepared graffiti marks, hidden corners, and objects left behind that seemed to serve as warnings. The town began to feel different, as if the ordinary calm had been replaced by a quiet tension that hovered over every street corner. People noticed strangers who seemed out of place, shadows moving in ways that didn't belong, and the sense that the community itself was being watched. Every day brought new questions. Who were these teenagers? What drove them to act this way? And, most importantly, who would be next? Detectives worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence, following leads, and trying to understand the motives behind what was quickly becoming a terrifying series of events. The initial belief that these were isolated incidents vanished. The town was being targeted, and the people of Albuquerque would soon come to realize that the darkness hiding in their neighborhoods was only just beginning to reveal itself. The quiet tension that had settled over Albuquerque erupted one rainy night, changing the town forever. A local jogger, seeking the familiar comfort of routine, stumbled across a scene that no one could have anticipated. In a narrow, deserted alley, the lifeless body of a teenager lay twisted on the wet pavement. The rain had begun to wash away footprints and obscure clues, but the evidence that remained was enough to send shockwaves through the community. The boy was barely older than high school age, and the brutality of his death stunned everyone who heard the news. What had started as minor disappearances now revealed its horrifying reality. A killer or killers were operating in their midst. The authorities rushed to the scene, cordoning off the area and collecting what little evidence could be found. It became clear that this was not the work of a single, impulsive act. The position of the body, the marks left behind, and the strange symbols scrawled on nearby walls suggested a pattern, a ritualistic method that left investigators unsettled. Each detail, small though it seemed, hinted at careful planning. The terror spread quickly, leaving parents locked indoors and teenagers fearful of even walking home from school. Streets that had once felt safe were now shadowed with uncertainty, and whispers of a dangerous group of young offenders moved from house to house. As detectives delved deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. The murders, though seemingly random at first glance, all bore similarities. Each crime scene was near abandoned or overlooked buildings, areas the city had long avoided. The victims, all teenagers, shared nothing in common in their daily lives beyond their proximity to these dangerous spaces. It was as though the gang responsible had chosen their victims not for who they were, but for where they could be found. Investigators realized that these killings were not impulsive acts of violence. They were deliberate, targeted, and calculated to create maximum fear in the community. The town began to feel the grip of a new reality. The local police force, already stretched thin by routine duties, now faced a challenge unlike anything they had encountered before. Traditional methods of patrolling streets and following leads proved insufficient against a group that moved quickly, operated at night, and seemed to understand the city's hidden corners better than anyone. Every tip, every piece of evidence, had to be carefully analyzed for patterns that could point to the perpetrators. Yet, each discovery only seemed to raise more questions, more uncertainties about the gang's size, their motives, and how far they were willing to go. Social media, once a place for casual updates and light-hearted posts, became a new avenue of terror. Cryptic messages and ominous images posted online hinted at threats yet to come. Graffiti marking territory appeared on walls across town, a visual reminder that these teenagers were not afraid of being seen. The atmosphere was thick, people with tension, and the community's sense of safety began to crumble. Each day brought new stories, new fears, and the chilling realization that the murders were not isolated incidents but the beginning of a sustained campaign of violence. Albuquerque had entered a period of uncertainty, where shadows on the streets no longer belonged to ordinary life, and the threat lurking within them could strike without warning. Detectives worked around the clock, tracking leads, analyzing connections, and trying to anticipate the gang's next move. The town waited with bated breath, knowing that every moment counted, and understanding that the young lives at stake were now part of a terrifying pattern that seemed impossible to break. The situation in Albuquerque had reached a tipping point. The local police force, despite their tireless efforts, found themselves outmatched by a group of teenagers who seemed to anticipate every move. The gang's mobility, knowledge of the city's hidden corners, and willingness to act without hesitation made traditional policing nearly impossible. Calls for help came from every neighborhood, and fear hung over the town like a heavy, unrelenting fog. It was clear that a new approach was needed, and soon the decision was made to bring in specialized SWAT teams from surrounding cities to take control of the escalating crisis. The arrival of the SWAT teams brought a new level of intensity to the investigation. Officers trained in tactical operations, surveillance, and high-risk entries joined forces with local detectives, creating a coordinated effort aimed at tracking and capturing the gang. The city became a chessboard, with every street, alley, and abandoned building under careful observation. Helicopters hovered over neighborhoods, night vision cameras scanned darkened streets, and plainclothes officers patrolled areas previously considered safe. Every lead was scrutinized, every tip followed, and the community watched anxiously as law enforcement prepared for what would become a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Despite the increased presence and advanced tactics, the teenagers proved to be unusually adept at evading capture. They moved quickly, slipping past patrols, using hidden routes through vacant lots, and disappearing into the maze of abandoned buildings scattered throughout the city. The gang's knowledge of their environment gave them an edge, and the SWAT teams realized that capturing them would require not just strength, but careful strategy, patience, and attention to detail. Each failed attempt raised tension among the officers and fear within the town as residents realized the perpetrators were operating almost freely, blending in with the ordinary rhythms of daily life. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered a basement in one of the city's older, neglected neighborhoods. Inside, they found a collection of stolen items, personal belongings of the victims, and other disturbing evidence that revealed the gang's activities in chilling detail. The basement had been meticulously organized, suggesting a level of planning and calculation that contradicted the teenagers' age and presumed impulsiveness. It served not only as a storage space, but as a chilling testament to their methodical behavior. Every item, every detail pointed to a group that was deliberate in its actions, confident in its ability to avoid detection, and increasingly bold in its operations. With the new intelligence in hand, the SWAT team began shifting their focus from reactive patrols to proactive intervention. Every operation was carefully planned, with officers using the gang's own patterns against them. Surveillance footage, neighborhood observations, and forensic evidence allowed the team to anticipate potential targets, locations, and movements. The city's residents, once gripped by uncertainty and fear, began to notice the presence of officers in plainclothes and armored vehicles, a sign that the authorities were taking control. As the days turned into weeks, the tension intensified. The teenagers were young, but their actions had already left a mark on the city. The combination of fear, skill, and audacity made them a formidable challenge, and every encounter brought the SWAT team closer to understanding the gang's inner workings. The operation was no longer just a hunt, it had become a battle of wits, patience, and strategy. The city held its breath, knowing that the next move could change everything and that the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. Just when the SWAT team believed they were closing in, the investigation took an unexpected and chilling turn. One of the teenagers, only 16 years old, had been secretly documenting the gang's activities. Hidden cameras, social media uploads, and private recordings painted a horrifying picture of premeditation and motive. The videos revealed that the murders were not random acts of thrill-seeking as initially suspected. Instead, they were part of a calculated campaign of revenge against peers who had bullied the group. Each crime had been planned in response to perceived slights, moments of humiliation, and grudges that had festered over months or even years. The shocking realization reframed the entire investigation. The gang was not merely violent. They were organized, intelligent, and deeply motivated by a sense of retribution that drove them to extremes. The town was stunned. Families who had once viewed these teenagers as ordinary children struggled to reconcile the reality of what they had done. The narrative shifted from a senseless spree of violence to something far more disturbing, a web of interconnected grievances where victims and perpetrators were linked in ways that no one could have anticipated. Authorities realized that understanding the psychology of the gang was now as crucial as tracking their movements. Every recording, every message, and every symbol left behind became a piece of a larger puzzle that revealed not just intent but a mindset that was methodical, cold, and dangerous. The recordings also provided critical insight into the gang's operations. They showed how the teenagers used abandoned buildings as hideouts, how they communicated secretly to avoid detection, and how they studied the city to anticipate police movements. The level of sophistication was shocking for such young individuals. Detectives and SWAT officers alike had to reconsider everything they thought they knew about youth crime. The gang's intelligence, combined with their willingness to kill, made them far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Each video revealed a layer of planning, a careful attention to detail, and a chilling pride in their acts, demonstrating that this was not the impulsive behavior of teenagers but a deliberate, terrifying orchestration. With the newfound understanding of motive, the SWAT team adjusted their strategy. Instead of merely following leads and patrolling neighborhoods, they began to predict the gang's next moves based on the grudges revealed in the recordings. The intelligence allowed them to narrow down potential targets, anticipate the group's hideouts, and prepare for confrontations with a level of precision that had previously been impossible. Every officer knew that the next operation could be dangerous, but now they had an advantage, insight into the gang's mindset, which gave them the ability to plan carefully and act decisively. The most chilling discovery, however, was the realization that the teenagers were not just acting out of anger, they were almost theatrical in their methods, leaving behind signs meant to intimidate and taunt both their peers and the authorities. Graffiti, messages, and personal items were displayed in ways that sent a clear message. The gang was watching, waiting, and fully aware of their own power. The community's sense of safety had been shattered, and the recordings made it clear that stopping the group would require not just courage but strategy, patience, and the ability to anticipate the unthinkable. The hunt had entered its most dangerous phase, and every decision from this point on would determine whether the gang could be contained before they struck again. Under the cover of darkness, the SWAT teams moved into position around the warehouse on the outskirts of Albuquerque. Every street leading to the building had been carefully monitored, every window and doorway observed through night vision cameras. The officers knew the danger they faced. The teenagers inside were unpredictable, intelligent, and had shown no hesitation in using violence. The tension in the air was palpable, a quiet hum of anticipation as the team prepared for what could be a violent confrontation. Every step, every decision had to be precise. One mistake could cost lives. The teenagers inside the warehouse were aware of the perimeter but underestimated the scale of the operation waiting for them. They had fortified the building with makeshift barricades, leaving traps and obstacles intended to slow down anyone attempting entry. As officers approached, the sound of whispered planning and nervous shuffling could be imagined through the thin walls. The SWAT team moved deliberately, using the intelligence gathered from previous surveillance and the gang's own recordings to anticipate their movements. The atmosphere was electric with suspense, a dangerous stillness that made every second feel stretched and uncertain. Inside, the teenagers were caught between fear and defiance. They realized the authorities had tracked them to this location, and yet they refused to surrender immediately. The standoff stretched for hours, with officers carefully navigating the line between assertiveness and restraint. Using a combination of tactical lights, controlled entry points, and strategic communication, the SWAT team slowly gained the upper hand. Each teenager was confronted individually, reducing the risk of panic or sudden violence. The strategy was methodical, requiring patience and coordination, and it gradually wore down the gang's confidence. As the operation progressed, officers discovered the full extent of the warehouse's contents. Personal belongings of victims, stolen items, and remnants of previous attacks were hidden in corners and behind barricades. It was a chilling reminder of the gang's actions and their meticulous nature. The evidence also offered clarity, confirming connections between the group and earlier crimes across the city. For the SWAT team, it was a validation of months of work, a turning point that allowed them to contain the gang without further loss of life. The teenagers were arrested, one by one, each removed from the building with caution and care, ensuring that the danger was neutralized while preserving the opportunity for justice to follow. In the days that followed, the city began to process what had occurred. The arrests brought relief, but also unearthed a deep sense of shock. The gang's actions had left lasting scars, both physical and emotional, on the victims, their families, and the broader community. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the full scope of the crimes, understanding the motives, the planning, and the consequences. The town had faced a level of danger that few could have imagined, and the operation served as a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the vigilance required to protect it. Albuquerque slowly began to recover, though the memory of fear lingered in the streets and in the minds of its residents. The teenage gang had been brought to justice, but the story of their crimes and the SWAT operation that ended their spree remained a cautionary tale. It illustrated the challenges of confronting violence, the complexities of understanding young offenders, and the need for communities to remain vigilant. The hunt had been long and dangerous, but in the end, the combination of careful planning, strategy, and courage had prevailed, restoring a measure of safety to a city that had been gripped by terror.